So what we see here is a really dynamic verb in Tlingit, and there's a similar root ne, which is to knit something, but those ones are different. It's the knit, or to tie things together in webs, to crochet, and this would be to weave woolen things, not bark or anything like that. So bark weaving would be the ak. So then we get ne, which is to do or to work on. So when we put the j in front of it, that's to work. And so usually you'd say like, I'm working, right? And so that could be, maybe you're specifying something that you're doing, or maybe you're just saying, I'm going to work, or I'm at work, or something like that. So then we get the name, is working on it or repairing it. I'm gonna mute you guys, get some feedback. And so this has more, it seems to be tied into working on food, gathering things. It could also involve like cutting food, and it sort of puts it into this sort of catch-all sort of category, but it seems to be related to subsistence activities, and that's how I usually hear it, and that's how Lear has it in his notes. So you're getting the wood, you're gathering some things, where the ausene, which we've got here, does he have that one? The ausene is usually having to do with just doing, oh, I don't think he has it. Maybe it's further up. Sometimes these pages get a little mixed up. So putting it back. So this is still the ye adane, at ye adane. She's taking away something. Ye adane, repairing the engine. Well, the ausene is usually more like some specific thing, and I think ausene would be an event because it has this completed phase, sort of like it's getting ready and now it's ready. It's a related form for that verb. So you could say, I'm ready. So you're either ready or you're not. So it has somewhat to do, the act is there because it's not quite a state verb, but it's kind of a related concept, where if I came in and I said, Yi'itika yenasne, and that means the literal translation would be prepare your room, but I'm really saying clean up your room. And so it reaches this sort of state of being clean, and that's why things usually have the act. But the act really just tells us the way that that particular verb conjugates. So another place we can go to look at this particular verb would be, let's see, I'll go to the, where Carrie Akishawu has her verbs right now, which is on the Alaska Native Knowledge Network. We go down to ne, give, take, show, happen, fix, ready, finish, dress up, do, or work. So there's another ne, which is a carrying verb, but I think it's probably related, but I would almost be inclined to list it as a different root. Like you could say, like take your tools over there. So here's the carrying form. So dach, ye, 0, s. So this is object, subject, s classifier, ne. Oh yeah, we got this one, I think. Marge was telling us this one. Chushanisne, get revenge.
So that would be the to do.
Yeah, and this is just to do, and so like the chush is there for like the reflexive, and so it's like it's interesting when you sort of break down the literal meanings of these, and then just sometimes you got to think about that less and just see how it's used. So here's the yan sane, yan yisane. And so this is to finish, complete. It could be used to clean, to pick up, to tidy. And this would be that related to the ausane. And then this is to do work on it. So this one is the act verb, and this one is the event verb. And this one, whoops. That has it as a motion verb. Here it is. So here's the event. I think this has them listed both as, no, so working as an act. So here we see there's an imperfective form. And then if we go to here, there's no imperfective form. So that's the big difference between the event and the act is with an act verb, it can be in the process of occurring. So you can have an imperfective or a progressive imperfective, but it's usually just a straight imperfective. Whereas the event verb, at some point it becomes completed. So it's either incomplete or complete from the Tlingit way of looking at it. And so you usually talk about this in either the perfective form or the future form or the command form. You can have hortatives and other things like that, but those ones are much more unusual in any verb. So it really comes down to how you conjugate it in terms of looking at it from an event perspective. Any other questions?
I have a question. Is there a way to download Tlingit Verb 16?
Oh, you mean that website we were just looking at? Not that I know of. You can get an older version, which would be the supplemental chapter to her thesis or to her dissertation, but it has this probably has, that one has about 575 verbs, and this one probably has close to 1,000, I think. And so this is a fantastic project. It's almost done. I'll ask her if she has a plan to release it. I also plan to ask to put it into the new dictionary. Probably not conjugating them all for person, but certainly conjugating them for the mode. So that if this were your verb, so if this were your verb, it wouldn't have the second person plural. It would just have the imperative, the prohibitive, and then it would look just like this. Although some of them you'll see they're conjugated for person as well. So if there's a perfective in there, ada yauta'a, it might say ada yauta'a, ada yaututa'a, ada, and so it would conjugate for person as well. So I imagine you could copy and paste this, like we could see what happens. So yeah, it wouldn't expand them all, though, would be the problem. And so I guess the steps, let's see, it would be kind of labor intensive, but if you went through and expanded every single one of these verbs, and then you select all, copy, go to a basic sort of text editor, and then paste. It looks like that works. The difficulty becomes, and you could still do searches, but if this document were to say be like a Word document or something, I don't know how long it would be. And if it gets really long, it might get challenging to scroll through. So if we just did sort of pages, so this is, and we've only expanded a few. So it's not too bad. 23 pages long. It's really got to think. But you can keep the formatting that way. So that's an idea. If somebody wants to spend a couple hours clicking, I think it's extremely useful. It's very useful to have.
I'll try that.
Okay.
And then I'll try to put it into, I guess, a Pages. Would that work?
Yeah, so it's I use a Mac, and so it's using Pages. Microsoft Word would do the same thing. A text editor would do the same thing. It'd be nice if the formatting stayed. Yeah, if you do that, I'd love to have a copy.
I'll give it a try.
We can make a PDF of it and just upload it, because we're just taking what's there. I think at the time we were kind of going back and forth on how we would write this. So this uses a combining low line. So for example, you have this, but if we were to write it with a combining macron below, it looks like this. So I think I, at the time, was using this combining low line because I liked it being a little bit longer. But what I've been finding is it's a little bit less compatible than this one, which still has some compatibility issues. Sometimes you look at a document on your phone and the underlying characters are just gone. Sometimes they turn out kind of funny. Sometimes you copy and paste between things. And
when you email to me, it ends up with a bunch of question marks where things are supposed to be underlined.
Really? Yeah. So we haven't perfected the system yet. We'll have to work on it. And then this is using, but you can see what kind of font this is using. And so it might help to have these fonts installed. I can't really zoom in on that particular screen, but the font here is called, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's DOULOS, and then there's a space and SIL. So the SIL fonts are free. You just got to go find them and install them. And so really that process, if you have a Mac, would involve doing a Google search or doing a search for it.
This would be for Word too?
Yeah, this would be for Word as well. So once the font is installed in your computer, all programs can access it. And so here, this is the SIL page. They've got a number of different fonts. I'd recommend this one and also one called Charis, SIL, and that's CHARIS. So you click on this font download, and it brings you to a window like this. It has a whole bunch of fun stuff to read. And you can read through, like I'd usually grab the first one. So you click here. Again, this is what this screen, this is what this screen looks like now. So we would click on this zip file. And it's a multi-step process. So you download this zip file, and then we get here. And by clicking on it, that unlocks it in your downloads. If you're like me, there's way too many things in your download folder. But here it is right here. So the final step is you go to your applications, and in here you'll have font book. When you open font book, the shortcut is Command O, which is just like open. You'll go to your downloads and find that, or you can be kind of smart maybe, and in your download folder, create a folder called fonts where you would have that particular font moved. But if you didn't, it would be here. And then what you're going to see is the ones that you can select are actual fonts. And so you would select that and you would select open, and that would install the font there. And so that's how you install new fonts onto a Mac. And so some of these, some of it could be a font issue if things are showing up as question marks or whatever. Make sure that if your default font, if it's not a Mac, it tends to sometimes be a little bit less friendly about special characters. But otherwise, you'd want to make sure that you're using a font like Cambria or Helvetica or one of these SIL fonts. Another font that I think is really nice is called Brill, Brill. The Brill font. I'll take you here. This one's also free. And really it's about fonts that are designed for a wide range of languages so that they'll allow some of these special characters. Because so there's a lot of very common fonts. Let's see. Times New Roman in some cases, Garamond in all cases, that it cannot handle any of the special characters. So having the right font really helps, especially if we're going to be sending files back and forth. It could be also the email program. Sometimes it seems like things are catching up to this, but not necessarily all the time. Any other technical questions or any other Tlingit questions? Okay, well, let's look at the barometer real quick.
Speak particularly. The how will go quiet. The how would that like it? See that kusitan. The how at will say ayaw the tea. The how gletiach tea gleta kusitan. The how will speak a hulach kusi ad. The how can the tune yeti Claudia geschichtelijk kustuachte was a kuti.
Pretty fun. I think we were there when she wrote that in an immersion camp at Chilkoot.
Ruth?
Anak. Ik had die uit de katuhan kunnen cheese. Ach, toen ik ging die kandidaat, weet ik echt de nee. Right. So we had a mission to translate some sentences. I think some folks have the crud. We crud has to do. There's been a lot of sickness going around. We'll hang tight and we'll move through some of these sentences and we'll look at them in Tlingit. We'll see what you guys were able to get out of these, and then we'll kind of go from there. And we'll walk through them. And there might be some where we've got to spend some time looking them up through sources, but this is really an exercise in perfecting, but improving our translation skills. And it also helps us to see how fluent speakers are using these different components. So looking at the Tlingit verbal structure, and this shows us how these little components get put together and how, so an exercise we did the other week was how to conjugate these different verbs for person. And now we're going to start conjugating them for mode and for really creating dynamic content, linking things together. And so one of the things we were looking at the prefix, and this is where all the different magic happens. Like all the conjugation really takes place here in between your thematic prefix and your subject. But you also have your object outside of your thematic. And so the thematic is these very small particles that have specific meaning. The most common ones are ka and ya, j, and then there are quite a few others that are going to pop up a lot, like sha and sh. And there are some cases where you're going to get a bunch of them. And let me see if I could find my favorite example, which is in Tlingit Verb Dictionary. And it's here. So sometimes these things can really start to stack up. So to shake your finger, like at a child, shek, shakadinash. So this has 3 thematic prefixes. So there, and it also has a built-in object pronoun. So it's really interesting. So if we were to write this the way we write verbs now, we had sh plus TL apostrophe E underline K, and this is the embedded body part into a verb, finger, sha, which would be the head, ka, which would be the horizontal surface, and this would be a D plus L classifier, and then nosh. And nosh is to sort of shake something kind of to and fro, I think, like shaking your head. And so you would say, the example sentence, ach, yade shekshakautinash. And then you might say, do yade shekshakautinash. I shook my finger at him or her. So we see, like, even though this thing gets really long, we could see the object is locked up, and that means the subject is going to be right here. Wherever those thematics end, and wherever the classifier is, immediately to the left,
I have a quick
there
question.
will be a subject.
Why is the D plus L classifier? Because Tlingit is just the D classifier.
Well, we
Did
say
something
because,
change?
yeah, so when we talk about classifiers now, what we're trying to do, let me pull up
It changes
illustration.
every 2 years, I swear.
I think we're getting close. We're getting close. And by we, I mean me and all the arguments I have with my own self. But I think we're getting, oops, let me find a different version. So thinking about how to teach the classifier and how to look at the classifier, we end up sort of continuing to think about really how it functions. And so this is the chart that I kind of like lately, and I've liked it for a long time. I don't think it's going to change because I think we've got a pretty good understanding of how the classifier works in Tlingit. All Na-Dene languages have a classifier. It's called a classifier because of the work that's been done in Tlingit, from what I understand. So the important things to note about the classifiers, you have these 4 different groups, 0, S, L, SH. The 0 group is the default. Most verbs, or the majority of verbs anyways, maybe not most, but the majority, the largest percentage of verbs are 0 group classifiers. And then S and L are fairly common. S probably has a few more than L, and then SH is very rare. They kind of have meaning. S tends to make things something specific, like I saw that cat, or I'm a member of that group, or I'm not dragging it, I'm dragging it by the handle. So it sort of puts something in a category, is what it most commonly does. The other thing that both the S and the L will do is they might add some what we call agency to the verb. So it's not just happening, somebody is doing this. So I say, "Chatyanik," I'm sick. "Chatyisanik," you made me sick, right? Like you coughed on me or something. And so, "Yanuwane, yanauksane," it's ready, he or she prepared it. So that's one of the most common things the classifier does, is it switches to the S group when we're doing something specific, or we're specifying some type of action, or putting it into a category, or we're saying somebody made this thing happen. If the root contains some kind of S or DZ sound in it, it will usually go to the L group instead. So you usually don't have an S classifier with an S built into the verb root. It just, for some reason, it just, Tlingits don't like that, so the L becomes preferred. Usually, it seems the order is there would be a 0, then there'd be an S, then there'd be an L group. The L group has to do with agency, but it also has to do with having some kind of attribute. So if there were a house, and I put a big dorsal fin on that house, we might call it Tligushi hit, because it has been dorsal fin. And then this is the same thing you get with Tlingit, because it doesn't have arms. So it's still an L group classifier, but it has the aerialis before Tlingit. It doesn't have arms. And this, I can't remember how to say it, but it would be the same way to say, like, he has one leg. To have one eye is actually, there's a verb for it. For whatever reason, that seems to be a different thing in Tlingit than losing a limb is different than losing an eye. So we say the first thing that becomes kind of manageable is plus I minus I. It's always, minus I is the default. It only goes to plus I if it's in the perfective, or if it's in one of these potential modes. So the potentials would be would have, there's no way he or she can. So they're pretty unusual forms, but so it's good to think of this as perfective, right? But it's not always an only perfective, but all perfectives will be plus I. Minus I is every other mode, so future, hortative, negative, and things like that. The imperfective, it's hard. It depends on what verb type it is. So we got minus D and plus D, and this is how we would talk about these things now. And it depends on who you talk to, but the sort of Tlingit linguistic community would say if the classifier is ya, we would call that minus D 0 group plus I. And these are just ways to sort of talk about it. And we talk about it so we can think about how that thing works. Because it goes plus D for a number of reasons. It might go plus D, in this case, because you're shaking your own finger. And if it has the reflexive SH as the object, or if it says chush right before the verb, or whoosh right before the verb, it should always be plus D. If it has kuch before the verb, it should always be plus D. So there are some things that will just kick the verb into this plus D mode. The minus D is the default. The plus D is like you've turned the switch on. So that's how we sort of talk about the classifier these days. The other funky thing is if a verb has an object and you kick that object out, it goes plus D. So I could say, Yachuch khatu, I'm reading this paper. But if I just say khatatu, I'm reading. So I'm reading the paper, and I'm reading this other paper, and I'm reading my phone, whatever. And then, if it's a fourth person subject, de, every non-zero classifier will be plus D. So that's why you have dudzi and dudji and dudli. All the zero classifiers will be minus D. Any other questions? Okay. Translations. Can somebody read this sentence?
Chyegugang away a kach shukai shitsuch hatagu ponri a des kunuguya.
What did you guys, some of you might know it, some of you might have found where I got all of these, most of these sentences. What does this translate to? Do we know that?
TS page. I don't know if it's on there.
So this is how it is written. I haven't listened to it, but this is how it is written in the Dowenhauer texts. It comes from, where was this first? Well, what's the English?
We have only begun. What is it? I know the way it's translated. We have only begun to uncover the way our ancestors did things, or something.
Yeah, the way our ancient ones, our ancient people, however we want to translate that one, did things, right? So this is Kitchnach. Wasadu Sakle Kach Enach Kitchnach. GD are the initials? George Davis. Dakwanach Sati Huqa.
Keep.
Angun Dach Awehu. Deshitan. Yeah. So the first, so Chayegu Genk, we should be able to, that derives from a verb. I would think of it now as just this sort of particle, because that's usually how it works. So you could say Yeksigink, and there's ways to use it as a verb. But whenever you hear Chayegu Genk, it means a little bit, right? Or a small amount. And so there was a Tlingit speaker who worked at Costco for quite a while. I was really excited because I heard he spoke Tlingit, and I was really excited. I was like, I'm going to speak Tlingit to this guy. So he's looking at my receipt, and I said, he said, and some people say gugwink with the gwe sort of sound on there. So it's a nice answer when people ask you if you understand Tlingit. Akach shakaishit aklagu kwanki ades kunugu. Yes, as we start to translate things, we say, okay, we can get the meaning for that. A weh is always this funky thing. Sometimes I'd recommend translating it. Sometimes I would just sort of leave it out. Sometimes it's
Kind of puts a focus on it.
Yeah, it puts a focus. Usually it's saying, I'm going to say something important, or I've just said something important, or I'm sort of transitioning. There's some speakers where they would just use it as sort of a pause. So they'd say, and then they would do that, and they would do that, and as they were sort of thinking. And so it has lots of different functions.
I view it as a vocal comma.
Yes. It works as a comma. It's a very good vocal comma.
I was always curious about a kach. It's like because of it, kind of, or
Well, so it's really funky. Kach with the high tone is kind of for something, but kach when it's low like that
kach with one.
is ka. But when you put a ch on the end of ka, it makes the vowel go long.
Wow.
So it's sort of, and then the underlying X suffix is either moving along on some, moving along around at a place, like you could say, nich kach wugut, to walk around on the beach, or it could mean to come back repeatedly to a place. Shakaishet zuch is our A plus verb of the sentence, and we'll look that up in a second. And so what we tend to do is we can get ourselves to the places where we're unsure. So we'll say, okay, we'll come back to that. Hatlagu kwanki, we should know as a noun, or we could look it up. That's our ancient people. So there's ways to talk about, I think, our ancestors. Some people will just say, sometimes they'll just say them, and it's just kind of embedded. Like they'll say, we're going to imitate them, and we just know what they mean. Sometimes they'll say hashish kuhas, and they're not talking about like those people who are my, parents, but they're really talking about, you would put those in capital letters. And sometimes they'll say hashagun, and sometimes they'll say hashuka. When you say hatlagu kwanti, you're talking about the ancient people. So this is going back.
And those are both long and low, hachagu.
Sometimes they are. Sometimes the tlagu is,
No high tone.
yeah. And so sometimes I see it with just a U. That's usually how I see it. But some of the vowel endings on a lot of words, they can be long or short. Like you can say ade or ade. Kwan, the people, our people of ancient times. Tlagu is mythical or could mean ancient in certain situations. So then we figure that one out. Then there's also, you could say, Chak like people of long ago. Chak is long ago. The way I look at it, Chak is long ago, like one or two generations. Going back like 3 or 4 or 10 or 100 is getting into Tlagu. Then Ades Panugu, yeah. Can we figure that one out? What it's doing?
The S would be has, yeah.
Yeah, so ade has. So it's an optional contraction, but you see it happens a lot, especially when people are really talking. It's probably good practice that if the word before ends with a vowel, and especially if it's one of these ya, ye, ke, ade, things that are directly linked to that verb, it should, contraction is a pretty good thing.
It sounds good to me.
It sounds good, yeah. So ades knuguye. What else can we say is going on with this verb?
Nuke.
Kunuk.
Yeah, so knuk. How would we translate that verb?
People do.
Yeah, to do or to behave, right? It's doing or behaving. Similar, like we say, "Wasaqiyanu," what are you doing? And so we have this other sort of do kind of verb, but it could also have to do with behavior. So then we've got ade hastanuk. We have a suffix on it, and then ye. So if we just had hasqanugu ye, how would we translate that?
Let's do
The place they do
Mhm.
thing.
The place they did it. The place they did it. But, and so again, if we isolate some of these,
Wait,
they get weird.
would it still have the suffix on it if you didn't have a
Yeah,
earlier
so
in the sentence?
It should say verb e, yeah. And that relational suffix has the exact same rules as the possessive suffix. So I would say they're all relational suffix. I wouldn't even call the possessive suffix. They are all relational suffix. It's the same suffix. On a noun, it means that it's being possessed or it has some relationship to something. Like if we say "Chone guchayi," that means that's Chone's cup. But if we say "Chakhini," especially if it contracts into one word, "Chakhini," that doesn't mean that some eagle owns that river, but it means eagle river or eagle water, right?
So what is the relational suffix on there if you just said haskunuguya? Why would that have a relational?
Is it? It's relating it to the place.
Well, when you add the "ye" as the post verb, this is going to be in the post verb spot because it's related to that verb. It won't always, but it should have a suffix there, right? So you would say haskunug, haskunuguye. And you could do that you could put any verb and you plug in "ye" and you add a relational suffix. Like there's this one, you could say, I think they say, "Wutudziduk," and then they say, "Wutudzidukuye." It's a cotton wooded place, duk being cottonwood. And so if you say, "Atyanagutiye," that's the place where he walked around, right? Like if, I don't know, somebody famous came here and we were talking about where they were walking around. Yeah, but then when we put the ade has kunuguye, how does the ade change that?
Well, I don't know why it does that, but it makes it into the way they do things.
Yeah, so it's the way. And the cool thing with this ade, yeah, it's like sort of bookmarks on a verb. So I've seen like really cool uses of it. So I think you could say, ha, kasiye awe ade ejit awatiye. It was strange the way he gave that to you. Like if he like threw it at you, or if there was just something strange
Something weird
about
about it. Yeah.
So you could this is how you talk about the qualities of some particular verb, or you're tying it to another verb. And then you're going to see how Tlingit metaphor reveals itself through the grammar. Des tenuguye, the way our ancient people did things. That's how you would translate this. Des tenuguye would be like the way they were doing things. And now you can either link it with a verb, because you could say, if we were talking about somebody, like someone says, boy, I want to learn how to draw like the old people did. I want to learn how to put up fish the way our ancestors did. And you might say somebody's name, Hu'away, Aushaguk, Ades, Haskanukuyeh, Hashagun. That person understands the way that our ancient people did things, right? So that leaves us with a kach shukai shetzuch, which I think some of you got, but I think it took a little bit of strategic digging.
I just remembered it from going over it with you.
We went over it in class. And this one drove me nuts, actually. It drove me a little crazy. And there's a lot of different little things you got to remember about Tlingit verb roots, is they get really kind of crazy. So some of the things that happen is a TS apostrophe will sometimes just turn into an S apostrophe. This just happens with fluency as people are talking. And it could be that there's just a variant for it. The other thing is, like, there's a verb embedded in the word kach. Right, so you got cha. What is this little cha particle in the front?
Porcupine.
Porcupine. So we got cha, sha. Sha is the classifier to have this some kind of quality, I think. And then you got kach. So we'll deal with the kach part in a second. But the cha. So if you could say,
is it like shachal?
Yes. So you could say nakatse chashkleid, a white furred fox, right? So cha embedded in the front of a verb in a prefix is hair. Cha, sha.
The thematic
Cut.
prefix, yeah?
Yep, it's a thematic prefix, and there's different categories. Some of them, and these are the ones that are body parts. And the cut, there's this weird thing, cuts for sharp, right? And there's weird that they can change their shape, and they do that all the time. So his name is Sharp Hair, right? Sharp Hair. Makes sense. And so, because you call it chawu is the word for a porcupine quill. So now, if we look up, always good to have Jeff Lear's notes. Someday we're going to type all these notes up. It's on the list of big projects. And if you guys, I don't know, we're getting down to the few in the class. If you guys wanted to negotiate and do some big project like this for your final, instead of doing a test, we could do that. So if someone wants to make a printed version of Shabu's verb database, that'd be great. Someone wants to type up, this is 800 pages, so you don't have to, you could.
Get on.
And you're
I don't have time
your
for that
hands-
before the final.
Your hand typing it, you got a month. I think maybe 50 pages
Okay,
maybe is
I'll
probably
do that.
manageable.
I'll do that.
And it would be extremely beneficial.
Be so useful.
Extremely beneficial.
Eat
And it would
Kune.
Dasaya.
Eat Woo says he'd rather do a puppet show.
Gone are the days of having fun. But that is also a negotiate. If you want to do a puppet show because you've been swimming in grammar and
Wait, could we,
retyping stuff, that's
Try
totally
and
fun.
transcribe a video.
You could transcribe a video. I also have pages.
No, just kidding.
I have pages that were given to me today that were in the possession of.
Oh,
I didn't sleep well last night. What's her name? She was your Yinakla away.
Leona? Oh, Agnes.
Agnes Bellinger. And it's about Tlingit na gudat away. It's handwritten. It's in Tlingit. And
the old old.
no, it's pretty new. It's pretty new orthography. There's on the first page, the left side is kind of partially gone. But if somebody wanted to, it's about 12 pages handwritten. Someone wanted to take a stab at translating that. We might even divide that one up into, because I think there's 2 or 3 different speeches. One speaker might be Frank Johnson. But they're talking about, Tlingit medicine.
Is there audio with that one?
Maybe. I don't know where,
Her daughter has a bunch of tapes.
Yeah, so it could be, and if you want to, she also has some recordings, Ernestine Hayes, that were Agnes Bellinger songs. She's trying to find a caretaker. Just let me know. Okay, so as I was looking through this, so the process that I go through, well, the first step is I look here. This is where I go first. So when I looked under, sorry, these letters are so small on this
How did
CD.
you get that to do that? How do you get that to do that?
Oh, so
Wait, we don't. I mean,
yeah.
I
Well,
can show you later.
under
Okay.
TlingitLanguage.com, you can get a lot of resources that Zeo Shanai and a couple others have gone through, and we've made these things. So Adobe Acrobat is what we use, or what I use anyways, to add this little table of contents on the side. So now you can go to Tlingit to English. We keep in mind, this is their sorting system. Can somebody explain how their sorting system works?
It's right. It's like front of the mouth to the back. No, is that
Yes,
right?
it's front to the back, right? So you go E, A, O, A. That's how they sort of perceive the vowels, and I think that's probably accurate. And then we start with H, and so It's a different sorting system than we use now, but it's good to just sort of know the logic behind it so it doesn't seem random. I can read this on my computer through the Google screen better than I can looking at it. Okay. So when I looked at the apostrophe S, and then I go and I look down, and then you would look under S, O, and I see this twist the branch back and forth to soften it. And then on the next page, nothing, right? So that was the end of those entries. And so I was kind of wondering, I thought maybe I missed something. And then if you look, I can't remember if I found it here. I did find it here. So I can't remember, I was looking all over, and then
in the notes too.
Yeah, and so I think maybe I found it here, just looking around, to move slightly, right? And the opposite of the negative form of that would be to keep perfectly still, to not even move in the slightest. So then what I usually do is I get into Lear's notes, and his is alphabetized sort of, I think it follows the same methodology. So here's TS, and you can also blow these up and get straight to the vowel. They're not always accurate. And so you see it here, and there's a variant. This shows you a variant to say it could also be written like that.
I think he's got that same verb form, shukai, down here. Something.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't see it. But yeah, so you see it's moving a little bit. So then we come back, and so we got this perfective form. If we wanted to blow this verb up, this is kind of how it works. So in the preverb is akach, because this suffix is tied to the type of verb, especially when it comes to action, because this is when you have de or dach or nach or things like that. And so sometimes when those are popping up right before the verb, and if something is moving, it should be a motion verb, and there might be other things that end up being motion verbs as well. So then if we sort of, what we're practicing here, and there's different ways to do this. Zeus has a different method. There's a paper on it. If you're interested, I could send it to you. It talks about, this is what we call segmenting and glossing. So the first thing that I like to do is separate the preverb and the verb. That's step one. So this is what you need to understand how the verb is working. The second part is segmenting, where I'll put a plus in between different words, and then I'll put a hyphen in between these different components. The other thing I like to do is I'll write this word the way its unaltered appearance. So ka, short and high, right? And this is on. And then so sh, ka, y is the perfective, zero classifier, or zero subject. So then what the next line does is it goes through and translates those individual components. And there's different ways, like for X, I usually put repetitive instead of a long or anything like that. And then sh is the end, ka is the horizontal surface, y is the perfective, zero is she or he. This is the classifier, minus D, L group, plus I. The verb group means to move slightly. So along the top of it, someone, he or she, has moved the edge slightly. And so we come back to, and then here's the second one.
Sorry, the perfective is you? I don't remember ever, I'm just confused, I guess, why it's not a word.
Well, I would recommend writing it as this, because it could become, like if I say, ausaku, chosaku, yisaku, right? So it's not, the default form is a Y, or it's actually this sort of Y with the two dots, which means it could be a Y or it could be a W. It's going to go back and forth, depending on what comes before. So usually but this is only when we're sort of writing the whole thing out, right? But it does help us to, I think, eventually see how it gets impacted by other things.
See, it's just interesting because if I would have looked at that, I would have automatically assumed it has to do with the plural you all, which is
Oh, maybe.
weird, right? I mean, because I've always thought it was a W. I mean,
Uh-huh.
but I'm just confused. This is new. Very new.
I asked Chashi to help me with it, this specific one, and he thought it was yeah.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
actually never heard you be perfected before.
Right.
I mean, I just.
Because yeah, I think you guys are right. Because that would be shakaushituch is what it would be.
Oh, yeah,
Good
that's
job. A plus, everybody.
So that would be plural you all.
Yeah.
That would be the subject, yeah?
Makes more sense. Okay.
What do you guys call them now? Verb roots or verb stems or what do you call them now?
So this is called the root.
How do you get the one with the top that bends like that? Because mine doesn't.
Oh, this guy
Yeah.
With-
Is it like a symbol?
with the Crippen keyboard.
Uh-huh.
Hold down the Alt key, push the number 2.
Uh-huh.
That's how you get Alt 2.
Mine doesn't look like it has. Mine never has the little top thing.
Use the Braille font.
Oh, okay.
It's probably a font thing. Braille is a nice, fancy font.
I gotta get all these things.
Huh, now I'm curious. Yeah, okay. That makes a lot more sense.
Because it's like it's not just one person did that.
Right.
It's you all are doing that
Uh-huh.
in order to learn the way of how to. Yeah.
So if we come back, so if we've got this so there's nothing in there about understanding. There's nothing in there about knowing. But that you've got to put these pieces together in your mind, looking at how the Tlingit thought world functions. So if he's addressing a person and he's saying, you all, or you perhaps have just moved this a little bit. And there's all these, and if you look at this series of speeches going on primarily between Kitchnach and Chashatk, although there's certainly others who come in there, they're referring, they keep talking about this box, and they keep coming back to these same things. And this is how you see the
Maybe they've
extended
moved,
metaphor.
You all have moved, but there's no perfective form in here, right? So
Mhm.
maybe you all, is it command? Is it like you all move the box?
Well, this is
lid?
where it
like
gets-
you move the lid a little bit
Uh-huh.
so that you can, because it's that conversation about the box of wisdom, yeah?
Right. Yeah. And so this is from that same set of speeches. So it could be
Imperative? No?
I don't think it's imperative. I think it's more like just a statement. That's the box lid, and all of us here collectively did that. He's saying, you have done this.
The only thing I'm confused on is the lack of a perfective marker in that
If
verb.
you've already done it,
Right.
right?
Then it would be it would have the woo in there showing it's like it would be shiku.
well,
But
let's take a look.
you're talking about like it has already happened. That's not what he's talking about, though, is it? Because we're still doing this, just a little bit. at
You
a
are
time.
moving it. You are moving it. That's what it is.
Well, let's take a look at. So here's
Imperfective. You are doing it right now. You all are doing it right now.
this is Zeush, his verbal structure handbook. There's lots of really good things in here, and one of the things is when you come along to these sections that talk about these contractions. so what we end up looking at here, let me get this to one page. So this is showing you this table, which is table 40. This is the shape. These are the possible shapes of your prefix with a perfective or an aerialis in them, or in some cases, both. And so this shows you everything up to the root. So you would add the root right onto the end of this. Huagut, or let's say a ya. Shoot. I can't think of one right now. What's an easy verb that has the ya as the classifier?
UT.
Yeah, A. Is that, or
Well,
is that a different-
these have subjects. It has to have a subject.
Okay.
Those have objects.
Oh yeah.
Well, I guess let's just use the one I thought. So we say, even though the root's going to change, huagut, watuwaat, yigut, iyagut in some cases, yiat, waduwaat, or waduwa. Well, no, that one doesn't work for motion verbs.
What is the so this that it's the number is the person
Mhm.
and then the is that subject?
Singular.
So going
Singular.
through ha, ha or ha, tu, I,
Oh,
ye. Oops,
So
I messed that up. I, ye,
First person singular.
Duh.
Second person singular.
0.
I mean first person plural.
And then again, same thing. Okay, so this is, and now this is, there's a bunch of symbols in here too. So what this shows you, going through, this would be a ya classifier. So this would be a plus I 0 group. A minus I 0 group would be like this. So you could say adechwagut, kesh adechwagut. Right, so they would change, right? The classifier or the prefix. This is the whole prefix right here. Now this next cat, and then this one on the left, any consonant plus I. So this would be si, or shle, or zi, or j, right? Any consonant and then A.
Meaning like
The classifier. This is the classifier.
Not thematic.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Sa, hla. So, and that shows you. So this is really.
What's up with his U's at the beginning? Go to the left. Sorry, with the dots above it.
Oh, here.
No, over there. The yucha. Yucha. No. Up in the very first one. First singular prefix.
oh, the
Left,
very
left,
first
left,
row.
left.
Like that?
Column.
Oh,
Left
right here.
column.
Yeah. What
Okay, sorry.
What in the world is that?
So when you say hua, you're saying perfective and cha. So this is saying if you expand it, these are the parts that are there.
Okay.
So yu plus cha equals hua.
Okay, so
U plus
why
two
is he
equals wu two.
doing U's as the perfective when they're almost always woos?
Well, so if we look at the perfective here, we have here it's a W, here it's a W, here it's a Y, here it's just a Y. This is actually where the perfective is. And the perfective is kind of weird because it jumps to either side of the subject marker. It should be on the left side, but it jumps over when you start contracting.
So when you're looking at his stuff and you see the U, it's perfective. Is
Yes.
What that is.
Yes, and this is how we're usually writing it now, because we're saying if in theory it appeared without anything around it, that's what it would look like. And that's why, because this shape and this sound used to be in Tlingit. This, like you used to say, duwadi, duwakuske. The old Tlingit, that's how they would say those things. But it's just changed. And so we say duyadi, duyakuske. And those are
It's more
things.
nasally Y is what it was.
Yeah, and that's what it was. And so it was this really nasally Y. And then as that went away, it changed to this thing that becomes either a Y or a W. But now it's outside of the verb, it's pretty much always a Y these days. Inside the verb, it still goes back and forth. So he writes it like that so we can see the shape of it. But if it appears, even if there's nothing before it, it will appear as w. Okay, so then here you would have plus D minus I classifiers, which don't have a vowel. And there's also sa and hla that get contracted down to a single sound, L or S, right? So you looking at what kind of classifier you have, you could come down and see, and then the object can go on the other side of this. So you could say, well, then it changes a little bit. But when we go down to this next category, what we have with CV is this says no matter what kinds of thematic prefixes you have, this is what the thematic prefix will look like. And you have consonant, vowel, and in some cases consonant and the letter U. Right? So this is getting a little tricky, but if we have ka, so we have kahwa, right? Kahwa, kahwa, kahle, in this case maybe, kahwa sha, perhaps. So what we're looking for is right there. I think this is what I think we're looking at with this particular verb. Shakaishetuch, you singular form. I think if this were a perfective plural, you would have shukayitituch.
So it is, wait, can you go back? So it's second person, no, it's first person.
I think it's second person singular.
You are doing it.
I think he is referring to the person who just gave a speech. He's saying, you, with your words, have just pushed back the lid to that box. Sometimes it takes a village. So this, because this would give us the,
I think it is.
Are you saying the perfective marker just got contracted right out of there?
I think what happens here, let me go back to my chart. If you have a thematic prefix plus the perfective plus I, you get, in this case right here. So you're going to have, so if it was ka and it was an L group, you would have kaishe, right? And so that's how that works. And so this is, and so we hear different ones all the time, like for example, ya. So you could say ya wadlaq, he or she succeeded. You'd say yah wadlaq, I succeeded. Yaw tu wadlaq, we succeeded. Ye yadlaq, you succeeded. Ya ye dlaq, y'all succeeded. Yaw do wadlaq, somebody succeeded. And so this is how these ones are working. Ya wadlaq would be the end right there. So what happens is if there's something that ends with the vowel here, a thematic prefix, plus the perfective, plus the I, those two collapse into a single Y. That has to be what we see here. And if I go back, and this is fun because I didn't catch it. If it's Li, it must be perfective. It has to be perfective because or else there'd be a bunch of other business here that would be putting it into this, like if you were to say, there's no way we could budget, to move it in little increments. Like if we were trying to push a car out of the mud, maybe we might use a verb like this. And in that case, the conjugation prefix would pop up, the arealis would pop up, the qa mode would pop up. So if we don't have any of that business and we have a plus I classifier, it has to be perfected.
In public speaking, you could still be singular addressing all. Like if you were at a 1,000,000-man march, you could say you are 1 in a million when you're addressing 1,000,000 people. That would still be singular, but you're addressing a whole
It
group.
could be metaphoric like that, like you're talking about you are going to go forward and you're going to work. You're going to succeed at this. And you would probably be using a singular form, like each one of you are going to do this. Okay, well, that one only took us 30 minutes. One sentence down.
So you just moved the lid of the box of wisdom just a little bit to know the way our ancestors, our ancient ones.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting. So we come to the way that Dick and Nora are working together, and they would have these debates, you know, because between Dick's knowledge of Tlingit grammar and sort of linguistics, and then Nora's just full understanding of the language, they would just go back and forth on how do you translate with this? Because you see, they use the we have only uncovered a tiny portion of the way our ancient people used to do things. And that's how they interpret it. And there's nothing incorrect about it whatsoever. It's 100% correct. But I think if we untangle what we're looking at, it helps us see the logic, and it helps us see how we can, you know, our goal is to become responsive like this. So we can use, you know, these things that were considered rare verbs. You know, if they were rare in the 60s, then it's like seeing a white moose, you know, and these days. And so we want to bring some of these things back to use the way that they were using them here. Okay.
A lot of this is still in context, and that's what interpretation
Right.
is.
So there'd be all these sentences around it, and then there'd be all these speeches around those, and then there's these subjects that everybody's talking about.
That everybody would already know, that's already embedded into
That's what's
the
so
ancient
crazy
memories.
about Tlingit.
Well, the cultural side.
The cultural side. And then when you say something, you know, my father always told me there was a spirit in all things.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody understood it. He didn't even understand why he said it. He just believed it. Then there was something a couple of weeks ago that you were going through an older translation, and then it just kind of made sense to me. That's just something that was embedded, and even though the language was lost the generation before, it was still inside there.
Right.
So
such fun stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, let me spread this one out a little bit. We have qajakti. Can somebody read the sentence?
Agu yahuch kanach ke duatje nujin yan atwudia hayadach aga ayu hastu ish kalul nek nuch.
Sheesh.
Butchered that one.
It took me a really long time to figure this one out.
Uh-huh.
And I got Chucky's help, but mostly what was giving me trouble was the wudu chayidach.
Uh-huh.
And I think I figured, I figured it out, but
Okay.
but it took me a really long time.
Well, let's start with what are the bite-sized pieces here? Are there bite-sized pieces?
A long time ago.
Yeah, long. So chomp is long, and then so you've got yach. So like. So chago yach would be sort of like a long time ago. You could probably do that.
Like through togetherness.
Yeah, so wuch kanach is together, and most commonly we would hear something like this in wuch kanach tu da'at. We got together, we gathered, we assembled, we had a meeting. Okay. So here's this is our big verb. The wuch kanach is sort of part of it as well. I'll put all that in the preverb.
It's
Touch.
multiple
Yeah.
people to walk. Yeah, is that it's to gather together repetitively?
The ch turns into j.
What's that?
The ch is the j.
Yeah, so yeah, the CH is the habitual, we call it habitual, others are repetitive. And so there's a couple things that are pretty cool going on here. So wuch kanach wutu da'at would be we gathered, we had a meeting, we did something. Wuch kanach gachtu da'at. So that's a plus D verb because wuch kanach is going to end up with a plus D. But when you have du in there, it switches it over to minus D. So that's one thing that, and what is new gene?
That nooch, right?
Nooch it's connected to nooch. Nooch is, and how do we translate nooch?
Always.
Always. So nooch-een,
Always with.
always used to. Always used to. Like long ago, people always used to gather. But when you say new gene, you're kind of saying, but don't anymore, right? You say, I always used to smoke cigarettes, or I always used to eat donuts, or I always used to, something that doesn't happen anymore. So there's this combination, there's a decessive that's on there. Like you could say, ha, that's a cool one. I didn't know that, but now I know. Okay, and we'll do maybe the last part because the middle part is the tricky part in the center. Has to ish katish niknuch.
They used to always tell stories. They used to always talk with each other.
Yeah, so this one is sort of in this repetitive form, and so what you got is to them, has to is to them, or with them, or however the verb sort of ends up working. Shkadishniknuch. We also have the du here. Someone is always telling them. Someone always tells them stories. If you just sort of pulled this out by itself, has to ishkadishniknuch. Somebody always tells them stories. So the context here, you might say, before bed, I always, somebody always tells them stories or something like that. So we got the duh in there for it just happens. Right? Stories are always told to them. Maybe. Yan atwutu yidach aqa'ayu.
That's like yun is the to completion, right?
Yep.
And then ut is it, and then
Something. Something.
yeah, okay. It's and then I'm not really sure how that breaks down, but I know it's about eating
Mhm.
after they eat. Once they had eaten it all, or like once they had eaten it to completion.
Okay.
Is it the perfective first, and then the do someone, and then zero classifier,
Mm-hmm.
and then root for eat, and then relational, and then duck from or through.
Yes.
From
So after or from, so the dach and the day, they work as far as direction and motion, but they work as far as time as well. So you could say, ach, yedach sati yedach awa, from the time I was a young boy. Or you could say, ha, Tokanei sati dachawe Tlingit Tangi awa achj. He or she has been hearing Tlingit since they were a baby. So it could be since, day could be towards, and so those could be time references. So like the simple, very simple version of this verb, if you pulled all the madness out of it that's going on, would be atcha. He or she is eating, right? So it just has to do with eating, not eating something, because that's acha, right? At, so you have yan, which can be added to the front of a verb to mean to completion, right? Sometimes it changes the meaning of the verb. So you could say wasa atune and yan uwane, and those are different. But yan would be to complete some sort of action. Like someone could say, if we were all in some Tlingit immersion school, I could say, Yesu, yejiyine, ishkunyejine yida. And you could say, Kek, yan yejechwane. So I would say, are you still working on your homework? You would say, no, I finished working on it. I'm done working on it. Yan yejechwane. I finished it. So we've got the at, which is built into the verb. This is what we call the fourth person non-human. And in this case, it's just built into the verb. Like when we say adana, he or she is drinking it, we'd say adana, he or she is drinking. Awacha, he or she ate it. Atwucha, he or she ate. Right. So it's another way to sort of remove the object from a verb. Some verbs have that option sort of built in. W is the perfective. D is the subject. Cha yi. So it's the relational is on there because it's turning into a noun, is what it's doing. Yan at yan at yi. That's why the classifier converts from yi to zero, or ya to zero, sorry. Yan at wuduwacha. People finished eating. You could say that. Yan at wuduwacha. The people, or you could just say people are done eating. You could also say yan at wacha. I'm done eating. I've finished eating. Yan at wuduwacha yidach. After the people have eaten. After people have eaten. So it derives from a verb, but in this case, it's no longer, it's turning into a noun. And you could turn verbs into nouns basically by doing this. Is the classifier should always switch to minus I, or it should be minus I regardless. It just stays minus I if it's already there. It gets the relational on there. And then it can also kind of turn things into adjectives that way, although you don't always see the classifier change. So you could say, Yakeyi cake. That's a good dog. Yakeyi cake. Oh, what? Keshkeyi cake. That bad dog, right? So you can do these things with verbs, and these make conjugating verbs much more dynamic to be able to do stuff like this. Anything else in here? So this is what we're looking at if we break it into pieces. Nuchin. And then Shkatishnik to always tell stories. Like long ago, when people gathered together, after everyone got through eating, that's when stories were told to them. So good. Everybody okay? Gok, Natu, Cha'asa. Somebody read it.
Kagagi awe yikpati chuklech kagasti Tlingit kashkau.
Sheesh. Okay, what are the bite-sized pieces here?
My prayer.
My prayer. Agagi. So this is a noun right here. Is my.
Is that it will be that way?
Yeah, it will be that way.
Let it be that way forever.
Let it exist.
Let it exist. So we got the k and the s classifier and t. So if we're to sort of have this in a perfective form, so this is a hortative form of this verb, it's big. The imperfective form, anybody know it? Forget the forever part, and we're going to put Tlingit in the front.
Kusti.
Tlingit kudziti. The perfective form will be Tlingit kudziti, right? So this, I guess, this is something you could maybe say if somebody was overdue, perhaps. They're going to have a baby. You know, maybe that could be it. But this is the hortative form of this verb. Chutech is one of these particles. These two things together mean forever. We get tlingit at the end. And so this is where we always think about how we're going to use word order, because you would usually say tlingit kudziti, tlingit kudziti. But it doesn't have to go that way. And then when you get into this hortative form, what Tlingit tends to do is put that most important information first. So my prayer would be forever, let it exist, Tlingit. So here's just getting used to seeing how these futures look. When we unpack them, we get yay. Here's the zero object, ga plus plus qa, every single time. So coming back to Crippen, he's got these ones right here. So these are all the futures that you could ever use. And some of them, they seem to be sort of interchangeable, whether you're going to say gaqi or kaqi. And then some of it might depend if there's something that ends with a vowel here, that might be preferred over that in some cases. Gachi, gachdu, guqa, kukwa. And so this is actually, as you sort of think about how verbs work, the future is the simplest, even though there's a lot of components to it, but those same components are always there. So this is the ga mode, the irialis, and the qa mode. And after that, you can add kha, tu, I, y, du, with zero. And this is what they look like. So you could say kuk, kuk, kwa, kuk, or let's go back to the ya. Yak kodlak, yagach tudlak, yak tidlak, yagach yidlak, yagach dudlak, yak kodlak. And so the root for a future in the positive form should always be long and high, unless it's an invariable root. So that's why the future is the easiest, because the root is predictable, and even though there's a lot of business going on, there's not a whole lot of, there's fewer options, because in the future, the classifier, it'll always be minus I. So you don't have to worry about what it would look like with a plus I classifier, because it's just not an option.
So the Irialis, you see him labeling it as the W now rather than the U.
Yeah, I stick with, I don't know why he uses the W, but I use the U. Yeah, because it,
More clear than Carrie Malcolm.
yeah, so there's different methods, and you gotta find your method.
Okay.
Did you guys have a question?
Yeah, well, it's not a question. I was just going to say I find Eggleston's thesis a lot simpler to work with. Say if I go to the hortative and she has these charts, first person, third person, it just makes a lot more sense to me than Crippen's. I know Crippen's is concise, or short or whatever, but it's just not that user friendly sometimes, I don't think.
Yeah, I think his stuff is really good to have as tables that you can look up, and so you can go to those tables quickly. But if you want to understand what all those components are, I think you have to go to other sources, unless you're already a linguist, because then then it would make sense. Okay, so moving to here's the hortative form. So what you've got is a zero object. Qa, and this is the conjugation prefix. Then you have qa mode, the S classifier, and then you have T.
And K is the thematic prefix, yeah?
Yes, where K is the thematic, it's the aerial. So it has to do, K has to do with the given space. There is another K, like Kusechan. That doesn't mean I love spaces, that means I love people. So there is one for people as well.
Well, there's one for weather.
I think those are the aerial and is the same one as the weather one.
So, but why would K have to do with spaces rather than people if it's talking about the existence of?
Well, so it has to do with to exist, to be in a space.
To be in a space.
Right.
So it's not. So could be. I always thought it was about people, but it's not. It's about space.
Yeah, because you could say something, nadak qutati, a table, the table exists. So things can exist. They don't have to be people. It's like Tlingit.
So like the table was born, so that's not a good translation. It's the translation.
Well,
born is
not everything can really go perfective. I mean, if you were going to have some metaphor about the table was born at that time, you could do it metaphorically, but really only people or sometimes concepts go perfective. And this is one of the verbs where when it goes perfective, it has a different meaning.
Okay.
It really means born. But it was like came into existence would be another way you could look at it. But it's one that really wouldn't be used, that you would say, it was made. Okay, so some of the things that you can get from here is if we look and you want to see how to look up using hortative forms, what you have is some tables that begin, I think, with 44. No.
It's super cool if you just wrote hortative on it.
Right. So these table 46 would be hortative, but what you have to know with hortative is what is the conjugation prefix. So if it's a zero, like to make something, which would be, say, and you know that because you'd say, nadab, make a table. Right? That would be the command form for table. So what you would have here's the shla. And so what you should have is let me make a table. And this is what you would predict with some of these. So this is what it's giving you, is the conjugation plus the qa mode, right? So what we're going to look for here is na. So, and we might know some of these, like you could say, here's should be the zero, nachtu'at is right here. What am I thinking of? Naqati, ye naqati, let it be that way, kind of. And then here they are with the qa and the qa. So this is where we reveal this form. It's going to be a third person. It's going to have some stuff before it. And so we should have it right here. Whoops, it's gonna be right here. Sorry. Qaqasti. Oh, it's right there. Qaqasti. Okay. From Cyril George. Somebody read that one. Oh yeah. Late come down, you eat kuaha. Quan Lin.
Oh, late ka? Oh, what? Sagu ya ka ya yek du akshi nuch hinde ya ana adi. Kak kweki.
Sheesh. What was I thinking of the other day? Like white man on the stairs. Late ka zait ka. Kind of fun. Okay. So what are the bite-sized pieces here? Sagu. Saguyach. Like what'd you say?
Like joy or
Yeah, like joy, like happiness.
People.
in it.
That's a sound. I had to look it up though.
Yeah.
The sound?
Yeah. Is it
Oh,
like
because to hear it.
Right. So let's see. Do I have this one open around? So one place. Someday this one will be ready, but you could look it up in other sources. But here's one. Let me get this.
Seriously, you just go to your house and have you download everything.
Yeah, I could do that.
I think you need one dedicated supercomputer anyway.
Yeah, I get the sound of something, the noise of something.
Interesting.
Right. And so it's interesting, and sometimes you just get these combinations, and that's just what it means. And so I think by doing this, especially looking at the older stuff, it just continues to push our own vocabulary. And this is all, a lot of these come from.
Yick in your face.
that's what I
Maybe.
A shallow.
Yo, yick, sucker. I don't know, probably violating some sort of cultural law. It's fun. But I think by doing this stuff, and it's already translated for you. So like the hint, the answer key is there somewhat, but then you got to find how do all these pieces come together.
It is repetitively heard.
Yeah, it's always heard, right? It's always heard. So do would be it's always heard. So when you have the duh, occasion we'll translate it as someone, but usually it's just like it happens, it verbs, right?
And then something about walking to the water, they, people, more than one person, and I'm not sure it has a conjugation prefix, yeah? No?
So so we've got a couple of, so we got hinde, which we know is to the water, and then the day is going to reveal. We went over, the suffix in a motion verb will reveal what type of motion it is. So we know that every verb has a conjugation prefix, and it's kind of locked into that verb. But motion verbs, they can have any four of the conjugation prefix, depending on the type of motion. So we've got these tables going back to what these tables can do. And I think I've got this one. Oops. I think I've got him here. I think I moved him somewhere. Maybe. So here are the different types of, well, first I think we got to look at the suffixes. I have them written. Here they are. So a T or an underlined X usually results in a zero conjugation motion verb. De, dach, nach, and ba are all na conjugation motion verbs. So this is why you say we de nagu, we dach nagu, anak nagu, shanach nagu, right? Kakwe ka nagu. But you would say nicht, or nicht uagut, or you would say, usually you wouldn't have the T, I guess you would put it in the command form perhaps, but most commonly, so this is how the suffixes work. Most of them, the T is the biggest one. So when you say like nicht uagut, it's because it's become a zero conjugation motion verb. And then we get down to this table, and this shows you these types, other sort of preverbs that are talking about motion. So you've got from the water to the shore, from the shadow into the open, into the water. This is why you say neich gu, because it's a zero conjugation motion, right? And this is why you say, going back to the T, achjit te, because you have that T on there. And so that determines what type it's going to be. So you could have ga, zero, and it tells you a lot about how you're going to have to conjugate that verb. So more lists of fun stuff that we have to remember. Okay, now going back to here, so when we have ya and then we see na in there, those two things should signal that we have a progressive imperfective verb. Yanagut, yanaat, or ya hasnaat, yandakin, right? What about that letter A before the na? Das away.
That's the indefinite human. Is it?
Yeah, so this is the four. Is that what you're going to say? Sisala?
I thought maybe it was athematic, but okay.
Athematic is a good guess. So it's sort of like, again, it's like we're playing cribbage with Raven, right? So Raven's like, no, that's a point for me because that card is red. And I have 4 of them, and it's Tuesday. So for motion verbs, there is not a duh. That is not the fourth person pronoun. It is a. So when you say ana'ati, when people go to the beach, when people go to the water, right? So this is what you have. And so the fourth person for like, and this is the case where you probably got to kind of use the someone or the people do it. And you say, hindi ya ana'ati. And this is like if you were going to be talking about people used to soak in the water. They used to go in the water in the winter. You would use a verb kind of like this. Hindeya ana'ati ta'uk. Khitzin qa. They would go into the water for strength. So there are all these little kind of tricky things that we've got to remember. And this is why it's important to keep in mind what type of verb it is. And then if you wanted to start using those fourth person, they're usually used to say like, this thing happens. And so what we typically get is these sentences that say, their voices would sound happy when they went down to the sea. Or you could also say, people's voices sound happy when they go down to the water. So this is from a story. This is duktut, and we have ka yayik, the sound of people. Du'achji is heard. Ya ana'ati, people going down. So when you learn how to tell stories, you kind of got to learn how to use these big fourth person sort of verbs to say like, this kind of thing happens. This is the typical thing that happens. And that's what the fourth person is usually doing. It's talking about things that are common. And when you really look at the stories, they're usually telling us about our culture. Our people were always happy to be going down to the water, and they're going to get in their canoes and go singing, or they're going to go do these things. And we still live like that today. When you see like some of these canoe movements and these other things that are generating a lot of momentum, it's because this was important for our people, and it's still important for our people.
But the heen does not signify freshwater opening.
Not necessarily, because
necessarily.
you say hinde or hini, and it just means going into the water. And it could be, there could be a stronger, I think and this is a case, it's interesting because I think of defaults. And I said, chat, the default is salmon.
Yeah.
But the inland speaker said, well, for us, it's a trout. So for hini, for me, the default is probably the ocean. But for inland speakers, the default might
For
be
me,
a
the
lake.
default is that meeting between the ocean and the river, because that's where everything happens. And that's what I thought Indian was that specific spot, because if it was just the ocean, wouldn't be else.
You would think, but a lot of times you would just say hinde going down to the water. Okay, gonna cheese you on. Ikechawe.
Fish.
Ikecha.
Try again in 2 days.